What's going on, everybody? Kalipus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2023 and going over whether or not it's actually a good phone to buy in 2023. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about this phone, be sure to check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. Now, as you could probably guess by the name, the Moto G Stylus 2023 is the successor to the Moto G Stylus 2022 that came out around February of 2022. And keep in mind, this is a 4G phone. As of right now, the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023 hasn't quite come out yet, although I'm sure we will be getting it soon. Now, during my time with this phone so far, I have noticed that honestly, in a lot of areas, compared to its predecessor, this phone is definitely a bit of a downgrade. One area where this is really clear is the display. With the Moto G Stylus 2023, we're getting a 6.5-inch 90Hz IPS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 270, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So back in the days of the Moto G Stylus 2022, one of my favorite things about that phone was having a really large, super high quality display. And while with this phone the display is really not bad, I mean, for what it is at least decent. So if you're doing stuff like maybe watching the occasional video using social media, stuff like that, you will get an okay experience, but compared to a 6.8-inch 1080p display, the display we're getting here is definitely a downgrade. So if you are coming from maybe the Moto G Stylus 2022, for example, and you're expecting it to be anything similar, then keep in mind you will be disappointed. And in general, if you are going to be consuming a lot of content and the display is really more of a priority for you, then honestly you can definitely do better. Now for storage with this phone, we're getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion too. So on one hand, for the average user, if you're really not doing a ton with your phone and you're really just using it for more basic activities anyway, the storage on this phone will be at least acceptable, and most likely, especially if you're using a microSD card, you should get by just fine. That being said though, keep in mind 64GB is really not a lot of storage, and compared to its predecessor that had 128GB, this is yet another downgrade. So if you are really concerned about storage and that's more of a priority for you, then yeah, again, you can do better than this. But at the same time, if you're really just looking for something more basic and you know you're not really going to be using that much storage, then you will most likely be at least okay. For security features, this phone does have Face Unlock, as well as a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key. So definitely nice to have both options. Honestly, just seeing how many downgrades we're getting with this phone, I really wouldn't have been surprised if they just for some reason took away Face Unlock too, but luckily we do have both Face Unlock and a fingerprint scanner, so definitely nice to have for flexibility. But real quick, let's give the fingerprint scanner a try. There we go. One more time. And there we go. So real fast and responsive, no issues at all. Now for the camera setup here, up front, we get a nice looking hole punch design for the selfie camera. This camera is 8 megapixels. Then on the back, we get a dual camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera and a 2 megapixel macro camera. Now in general, when it comes to camera features, this is yet another downgrade. The Moto G Stylus 2022, if you don't remember, did have an ultra wide camera, which I feel like at this point in 2023 is honestly such a popular, common feature that pretty much every phone should have one. I mean, that's really not the case. There are phones like the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G, for example, that's honestly a great device, but it still doesn't have an ultra-wide camera, so I guess I can't knock this phone too much for not having one. But at the same time, just considering its predecessor did have one, it's always a huge disappointment when a manufacturer takes away features in a newer phone. That's pretty much the opposite of what we actually want, so definitely disappointing there. But on the bright side, I will say the actual photo quality with this phone is really good. To give you an idea of what it can do, here's some pictures taken with the Moto G Stylus 2023. In general, for being a phone that's like $199 full price, I do think this phone can take some really good photos. So if you're maybe not too concerned about having an ultra-wide camera, but you do want to take some really nice regular photos for something like Instagram, for example, then in general, I do think the Moto G Stylus 2023 will be a pretty good choice for you. So that was definitely one pleasant surprise with this phone, because again, I feel like in comparison to the Moto G Stylus 2022, despite not having as many features, the actual photo quality itself is quite a bit better. And then keep in mind for video, this phone does have a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, so no 4K, which in general at this point in 2023 is not surprising at all. Pretty much no phone in this price range can record 4K videos, but if you're coming from maybe the Moto G Stylus 2021, for example, I know the 4G of that phone for some reason could record 4K videos in the rear camera, so just keep in mind in case you're expecting that feature. Again, this phone can't do that. It does max out at 1080p. Now for the RAM and processor, with the Moto G Stylus 2023, on one hand it's Definitely not a fast phone, but on the other hand, for a 4G phone, I want to say most of the 4G phones we're seeing being made at least this year are honestly really not very fast at all. I'm not counting the phones that were made like 2 or 3 years ago. But when it comes to 2023 phones, we have things like the Motorola Moto G Play 2023, Samsung Galaxy A14 4G and the A04s, and countless different carrier branded phones. And I will say honestly, every one of them that I've used is pretty slow. And sure, at this point in 2023, you're probably not getting a 4G phone expecting it to be super fast, since after all, 5G is really the future. But at the same time, if you're looking for a basic phone and you don't really care about 5G connectivity, but at the same time you want decent performance for more regular use, I do think for what it is, the performance on this phone is pretty good. Now with this phone, we are getting 4GB of RAM in the MediaTek Helio G85 processor. And in general, if you're just doing more basic activities like web browsing, social media, streaming some videos here and there, and maybe listening to music and stuff like that, in my experience, you're not really going to have any slowdowns or lagging or anything like that. So while it's obviously not going to be nearly as fast as a much higher end device, again, if you are looking for something for more basic activities, this phone will get the job done just fine. Now I did run a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone, and then comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of whether or not this phone will be a performance upgrade for you. Because of course, depending on what you're coming from, it could be a solid upgrade, or it might be a pretty big downgrade. It really just depends. If you're coming from, I want to say, any 5G phone, then yeah, this phone is probably not going to be an upgrade, especially at this point in 2023. Even the really cheap 5G phones are getting pretty fast now. But if you're coming from something that's really low end, then chances are, while this phone might not necessarily be a huge upgrade, again, the performance is probably going to be at least decent for what you need to use it for. Now for the battery, with the Moto G Stylus 2023, we're getting a 5000 mAh battery. This supports 15-watt fast charging, so definitely a great battery here. The charging speed is pretty decent, maybe not the best, but it does get the job done. But keep in mind, to actually use the 15-watt fast charging, you will of course need a 15-watt charger, which this phone does not come with. So again, definitely keep that in mind. Aside from the charging speed, with the 5000 mAh battery, you can expect to get great battery life here. And honestly, if you're familiar with Motorola, this is not really going to be a surprise, because I want to say the vast majority of newer Motorola phones do have 5000 mAh batteries, if not all of them for that matter. So yeah, the battery here is really good, and you're not going to have to worry about that. So if you're looking for a phone you can really use all day without charging, then this phone will be a great choice. And of course, down the road as the battery degrades, which all batteries do, with this phone you're not going to notice it nearly as quickly as a much smaller battery. So if you like to get one phone and then keep it for a longer time without replacing it, the Moto G Stylus 2023 will be great for that too. For the software, this phone does have Android 13, which is great, and while Motorola definitely doesn't have the best software support ever, I do think it is pretty decent. Over the past couple years, it has been at least getting better, so while it's still not as good as something like Samsung or Google for example, I am guessing this phone will at least get one major update maybe after Android 14 comes out, so definitely not bad. When it comes to other features, on one hand, unfortunately, this phone does not have NFC, which at this point in 2023 is kinda disappointing, but considering this is more of an entry-level 4G phone, I guess I'm not really that surprised. There are plenty of 4G phones like this that don't have NFC either, but with tap and pay becoming so much more popular and widely used, I feel like really every smartphone should have NFC at this point. I mean, even if you don't use it now, who knows, maybe you might want to use it in the future, and of course if your phone doesn't have NFC, then you won't even have that option. So just keep in mind again, if you see yourself ever using tap and pay, you might want to skip this phone because it doesn't have NFC, so you won't be able to use that feature. On the bright side though, one surprisingly cool thing about this phone is it does actually have stereo audio. Now in case you don't know what that means, when a phone has stereo audio, if you're doing something like watching a video for example, sound is going to come out of both the main speaker and the earpiece, giving you a much more immersive experience. And when it comes to really low-end phones like this, phones in this price range very rarely have stereo audio. So if you are consuming a lot of content, especially stuff like listening to music, then this definitely will be a nice thing. In addition to this, of course, as the name suggests, the Moto G Stylus 2023 actually does have a stylus. Surprise, surprise. And I will say, for what it is, this stylus is actually pretty good. Sure, it's still not the best, but even compared to the Moto G Stylus 2022, I feel like it's actually a little bit better. And that's one cool thing I have noticed about Motorola. Every time they release a new stylus phone, the stylus does seem to be a bit more sensitive and just higher quality overall. So if you are looking for a phone to take like handwritten notes and do stuff like that, then I do think this phone will get the job done just fine. And compared to other alternatives like the TCL Stylus 5G for example, I do think the stylus on this phone is quite a bit better. So if you are looking for a phone that has a stylus, not that you really have many other options, but just keep in mind, for what it is, the stylus on this phone is definitely good. But in conclusion, is the Motorola Moto G Stylus 2023 worth buying in 2023? Now, my honest answer here is, if you're actually paying for it, I would say no. The reason being, the Moto G Stylus 2022, unless you really want Android 13, is honestly better than this phone in every way. And I've heard of people getting that phone for like well under $200 at this point. And since this phone is going for around $199 factory unlocked, which granted is really not a bad price for what you're getting here, I feel like getting the Moto G Stylus 2022, which is again honestly just better for a lower price, is really worth putting up with only having Android 12 for. Now that being said, I know this phone is starting to be offered by some US carriers, and I'm sure in a few months all of them are going to have it, and in that case you might see offers for this phone for like $10 or something. And if you can get this phone for that close to free, then that does change things. I feel like if you're getting this phone for some sort of deal and you don't have to pay for it, then if you are looking for a super basic device and you want a stylus, it is a pretty decent option. But again, if you're paying full price for it, I personally would just avoid it, especially when the 5G version comes out. I'm sure the 5G version is going to be quite a bit better. So in general, on one hand, is the Moto G Stylus 2023 actually worth buying in 2023? Again, at least right now, I would personally say no, but if you can get it for free or close to it, and you're really looking for something more basic and you don't really care about having a super large display, a ton of storage, a bunch of camera features, and a really fast processor, then honestly for more basic needs, provided again you don't really have to pay a lot for it, I would say in that kind of situation this phone is at least worth using. Now again, if you do want to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.